Welcome back, and thank you once again for joining us for another edition of the Riding Report. And as always, I have our MP, Scott Aitchison, joining me. Scott, thank you very much, and how are you doing?
I'm great, James. How are you?
I'm
Thanks for
great.
having me.
No problem. I'm feeling a little more positive lately as things seem to be going in that trend. So I think a lot of people are feeling the same way as well. But on that note, I do want to kind of ask, how are things over on the Hill? How are you doing up there, and how is Parliament going?
Well, it's sort of going. We have twice weekly virtual meetings, which are over Zoom, which are, as I've mentioned before, not really ideal. We have an in-person sitting on Wednesdays once a week, but of course it's not really a question period. It's not really. It's designed to be a committee specifically related to COVID-19, and of course in that committee in the House of Commons, we can't ask questions about the other things that the government is doing right now. It's only related to COVID-19 response. So, you know, it's going okay, but we need to get back. I think that as our economies open up with precautions to make sure that everybody's safe, there's absolutely no reason why Parliament shouldn't do the same thing. In fact, I think I would suggest that Parliament is equally as important as any business. It's essential and fundamental to our democracy. So it's the government needs to be held to account. That's a constitutional role of Parliament, and we need to get back. So I'm eager to get back. I've only been there once for one of the in-person settings, where I was able to, thankfully, bring up important issues related to small business and specifically summer camps in our area. But we need to get back and deal not just with COVID-19, but with the many other issues the government's dealing with.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's a bit disappointing actually that the government isn't willing to continue conversations outside of COVID-19. I mean, I understand that is the main theme of across Canada, but it would be nice to have some other issues being dealt with right now, right?
And some of those issues, they're able to deal with those in the online version of the House of Commons. Um, but it's time for Parliament to get back to work. I mean, not necessarily all 338 MPs at once. I think that we could do, a limited number of MPs and get back to our regular schedule of certainly a meeting in the House of Commons. So it's important to do that. It's important to make sure that the precautions are in place, not just for members of Parliament, of course, but for the security staff and the clerk's office and all the administration that's required for the House of Commons to operate. The, translation, simultaneous translation, all those folks need to be protected as well. But we can do those things. We've demonstrated in the healthcare sector, in lots of essential services, and now as we sort of slowly start to open up, there are ways to do this. And Parliament, if it's an essential part of our democracy, then we need to do it.
Now, I know your current leader, Andrew Scheer, was hoping to have quite a few more of your party members back in the Hill again. Can you tell me a bit more about that process? What's happening with that? Where are you hoping to get?
Yeah, well, so the way this works, of course, is that the House leaders of each party, so in our case, of course, that's Candace Bergen, meets with each other to negotiate how we proceed. And of course, that's ongoing right now. So I would imagine there's a wide range of perspectives, although I understand the Bloc is now interested in seeing some changes to the way the government's handling a few files on COVID-19. So we may find we have an ally in getting the House back, back more regularly to the in-person settings if the Prime Minister doesn't jump to Mr. Blanchet's demands.
So one of the main issues that outside of COVID-19 that you were quite concerned about, I know the Conservatives were concerned about, was the gun ban. So I'm just curious where things are at with that now. I know there was quite a bit of discussion to do with that. There was some confusion in messaging. Where are we now with the gun ban process?
Well, actually, this is a great example of an issue where the government is certainly active on more files than just COVID-19. They did an order in council to restrict the sale and use and ownership of another 1,500 what they describe as assault-style weapons. But of course, we're hearing from lots of law-abiding Canadians and sport shooters and hunters that there's really not a lot of science behind how they've made their decisions. That's the kind of thing that there should be debate in the House of Commons. There should be discussion, and the opportunity to do that just isn't there. So the government's proceeding. There's a grace period, but they are proceeding as if legal, law-abiding firearms owners don't matter, and they don't really seem to care what the opposition parties have to say.
Again, sounds disappointing because they're really not hearing the message coming from Canadians, and maybe, I don't know if they're just blinded by the COVID-19 issue right now and not really taking that opportunity to listen to Canadians. What more can the Conservatives be doing to try to counter this issue right now?
Well, I'll tell you that I'm going to say just in relation to your comments, the cynic in me suggests that they used it as cover, COVID-19, to do something that they knew would be unpopular. The problem with this whole thing is that they haven't done enough to address the root cause of the gun violence that does go on, particularly in the larger centers, and that of course relates to smuggled handguns from the United States, and then of course oftentimes these people involved in these crimes are involved in gangs, and of course we need to address the root cause of why young people get involved in gangs in the first place. There's a range of reasons. I'm sure poverty has got to be at the top of the list. And so instead of addressing those issues, they've just taken a few more rights away from legal, law-abiding firearms owners, and that's unfair. So in terms of what the Conservative Party can do, we continue to raise the issue, point out the flaws. Obviously, that's the most we can do right now. We hope to get back into the House of Commons so we can actually challenge the government further on what they've done, to try to point out the inaccuracies of their public statements, the inconsistencies in their public statements, and the order in council how it's written, and to challenge them on actually solving gun crime as opposed to just punishing law-abiding Canadians.
Scott, just sticking on the topic of controversial topics, I wanted to get your thoughts and hear if there's anything happening in terms of discussion on something that's been in the media quite a bit, which is the contact tracing through electronics. Discussion that's been happening quite a bit lately about how to track people that may have COVID-19 using their cell phones or other electronic devices. So, has there been any discussion politically about this yet? I know a lot of medical professionals have brought this up as an option to again track people with COVID-19. What's happening over in the House on the Hill?
Well, I know that the government is certainly reviewing and looking at the possibility of using this kind of technology. I just watched the Prime Minister this morning on his daily discussion with a friendly press, where he talked about the challenges of some of the technology that they particularly drain batteries. But it sounds like the government's very interested in proceeding with one of these types of tools. He, of course, wouldn't comment on whether he would force Canadians to do this. I think that might be a challenge for the government to insist upon something like that. But they are certainly reviewing it and looking into how that technology can be improved to be effective in the Canadian context.
Just going back to medical professional comments, they are suggesting that this is a non-negotiable option, which does come with quite a lot of privacy concerns. What type of stance do you think the Conservatives would take if the government decided to move in that direction?
Well, you raised it right there, James. I mean, the medical professionals obviously, if they feel it's something that has to be done and must happen, that's the very kind of thing that the House of Commons and your Parliament exists for, to debate the fundamental questions of private rights and public security and public good, and where that balance should lie. This is an important question. I wouldn't be surprised if the vast majority of Canadians are more than happy to download an app and for their own safety. But that's a discussion that should happen. And so I know that we have our national caucus meeting later on this afternoon. I am quite sure that it'll be one of the topics that comes up for Conservatives to discuss.
All right. Well, Scott, just sticking on some more national matters, and something else you've been quite adamant about is getting funding for Canada summer jobs. So, I know you've been trying to push to get that funding, more of that funding coming through. Where are you at with that right now? And, what are you overall hoping for?
Well, what I'm hoping for is that the government will take a certain amount of money out of the Canada Emergency Student Benefit and put that money into the Canada Summer Jobs Program. Of the 9 billion, I understand that a certain number of billions are for student, um, you know, uh, payment of tuition fees and those kinds of things. But about 5 billion is to be paid directly to students. And so I just feel pretty strongly still that you could take some of the money out of that program. And at the very least, even if you didn't reopen Canada Summer Jobs, you could put enough money into the program to fund all the original requests. And you'd actually be helping an awful lot of these small businesses in communities like ours that don't seem to fit into any of the other categories of support from the government, but you'd also be helping students and employers at the same time. From what I can tell, in our case here in Parry Sound, Muskoka, there was about 700 or so $1,000 worth of approved applicants. If there was enough money to fund every single one of the eligible applicants for Canada Summer Jobs, it would amount to just over $1.3 million. So you could potentially double the $263 million Canada Summer Jobs Program and help thousands more students and employers all across the country. And it would save you money, obviously, at the end of the day, in the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. So we've had a lot of discussions amongst our caucus colleagues. Our shadow critic for employment is Dan Elbis from West, great guy. We've had a couple of really good chats about it. He's intrigued by the idea, really likes it, and it looks like we may actually make it part of our official conservative position on this issue. I've had a couple of conversations now with a couple of ministers about it. I've sent emails to Minister Qualtrough with no response yet. But I'm not done fighting for this one, and they've started to announce a few of the Canada Summer Job recipients, but there's still more to come, and I think there's still time for us to expand this program. So I'm not giving up on it.
Now, Scott, you mentioned a great point about supporting local businesses, and I do want to dive more into that conversation, but we do need to take a quick break. So when we come back, we're going to come back to that. You are watching The Riding Report. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to The Riding Report. I am your host, James Bowler, and of course, joining me is our MP, Scott Aitchison. Scott, just before the break, we were chatting a bit about Canada Summer Jobs programs, and you'd mentioned about businesses that are falling through the cracks, especially locally here in Muskoka and Parry Sound. Now, a few of the chambers locally have been working on strategies to try to help these businesses that are falling through the cracks. Not everything is helping them financially. So what can the federal government be doing, and what can you be doing as a representative to help with this process as well?
Well, obviously, I continue to advocate on behalf of citizens and small businesses in this riding. There's lots and lots of communities just like ours in many ways all around the country that are in the same boat. So, thankfully, it's not just my voice. It's the voice of dozens of other MPs from my party, from the other parties, even from the Liberal backbenches are saying the same thing. And so we continue to do that, obviously. I'm happy to report too that the Huntsville Lake-based Chamber of Commerce, in partnership with the BIA, have come up with a proposal for all levels of government to assist helping get businesses get back on their feet as we slowly reopen. So I've been reviewing that. I just received it this morning. There's a couple of particularly interesting ideas in there that relate to the federal government that I want to dig into a little bit deeper. But and obviously I'll be discussing that further with representatives of the chamber, and hopefully with the province and the municipalities as well, to talk about how we might work together to come up with plans that actually help people, as opposed to just skip over their heads like so many of the federal programs have.
Now, you recently had held roundtables with these chambers, joined by your colleague Norm Miller. And you mentioned before that that's probably going to be, there'll be another round of those happening. Do we know when those are going to be coming up?
No, not yet. I think that well, we did do another roundtable that Norm had organized, actually related specifically with with the chambers, specifically all around the riding, to talk about what opening up looks like and what supports maybe they could use. So this report that I've received from the Huntsville Lake Base Chamber of Commerce, I think, is in it really comes from that first round of discussions we had over Zoom with the business community, and then of course that follow-up discussion with Norm Miller and myself about the reopening and what that looks like. And so I think based on what we see in this report, for example, and some discussions with the municipalities, we could probably hopefully start something maybe as early as next week.
So speaking about some of the things the Conservative Party has done to help with these businesses falling through the cracks, the Canada Emergency Business Account, I believe it's called, recently Conservatives' recommendations were helpful in sort of tightening up the protocol of that and allowing more small businesses to take advantage of that. Can you tell me a bit more about that and how people can take advantage of it now?
Well, there was a reduction in the total payroll you had to have, so that was one of the recommendations. We had to access some of the credit available to small business. The other, and of course, the other big one that we worked on was some changes to the Canada Emergency Student Benefit that actually put a requirement in there to demonstrate for applicants to demonstrate that they've looked for work but they can't find it, or they can't find something that's safe and appropriate. We've also we've pushed hard for changes to these programs so that they would help truly small businesses, the ones that still don't meet the criteria for the Canada Emergency Business Credit Program. So one of the other things the government did do is they've put some money into their regional economic development agencies, and of course that's FedNor here, and so there is new money available through there to assist with some of these truly small businesses, and most of those loans, I believe, will be funded through Muskoka Futures, which I understand has I think had their fund boosted by about $75 million. So these are some of the things that we've pushed for and had some success with, and we obviously want to continue that, but we also want to get on to the discussions that about the other things the government is doing as well. So we've got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time.
So shifting away again from COVID-19, talk a little bit about one of the biggest issues that's not COVID-19 affecting the area, which is internet connectivity in rural areas, especially around Muskoka. It's a huge issue right now. I know that you've been working with a strategy group to kind of discuss how to fix this issue. So, there are a lot of providers, cable internet is one of the main ones in the area that's providing internet. How can you be working with these companies to try to bring this issue to the forefront and get more people connected?
Well, as a caucus group in the Conservative Caucus, we've put together a bit of a discussion paper, and we're launching a consultation with Canadians all across the country. I think the Liberal government, and certainly the Harper government before it, recognized the importance of this issue and put money into the file. There are a lot of nuances to the file too, though. I mean, you look at some of the local providers that we have in Parry Sound, Muskoka. They're in many ways competing with some of the national players as well. And so, oftentimes what happens is those national players will gobble up the contracts that are available. They win those and they tackle the low-hanging fruit, but not necessarily expand the network as much as we would like to see it happen. So part of our strategy is to come up with a strategy, a true strategy that can take the billions of dollars that have been committed to this file to make sure that it's getting, expanding the network, expanding accessibility to broadband services as far as possible. We've set an ambitious target. We've said, there's no reason why we can't shoot for having all Canadians connected by the end of 2021. I think it's an ambitious target, but I believe you have to be ambitious, otherwise you'll never get anywhere. So that consultation has been launched, and I encourage people to participate in that. We need to make sure that the precious dollars that the government, federal and provincial governments, put into this file are doing what they're meant to do, and connecting the most number of Canadians possible.
Well, I mean, when internet is being named as a basic right in Canadian homes, need to start getting that process moving a little quicker, right?
Absolutely. In today's modern society, access to broadband internet services is as fundamental, as any other tool to participate in society. Without it, it's a significant disadvantage, and I have no problem with calling internet access right. I think that we need to take it that seriously.
So, and I understand there's a local group that's working specifically on a strategy for the riding. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, there's a couple of different groups. There's that work on both sides of the riding, and I've had a number of conversations with leadership of those groups, and of course there's also private sector providers that are interested in expanding their networks as well. So those conversations are ongoing. They're all eager, but they all recognize, of course, all these private providers. They can't. There's no way that they can do it on their own. They do need the financial support of government, even if it's in super low interest loans for a portion of the capital investment required. So just trying to coordinate the approaches of all different groups that are interested in this, make sure it's a fair and open process, and that we're achieving the goals that we need to achieve.
All right, Scott. Well, we're nearing the end of the show. We're not quite there yet, but before we get there, I just wanted to talk a bit about, what you're hearing around the riding from your constituents. I know you're probably getting a lot of phone calls right now. What are some of the main themes that you're hearing right now?
I would say that the main themes continue to be, ensuring the safety and health of residents. There's still a little bit of anxiety, I think, about the opening up process and how that will work, and how we can ensure that we remain healthy and that we don't, overwhelm our healthcare system. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion about, how quickly that should happen, what precautions need to be put in place. And of course, these are decisions made largely by the provincial government with support from the federal government. So obviously, I think it's important for us to reopen our economy, but to do so with the necessary precautions in place. And whatever we can do as at the federal level, I'll obviously advocate to ensure that the right amount of personal protective equipment is available, and that there's certainly enough testing. I know the Prime Minister promised today that he could help provinces. The government of Canada could help the provinces ramp up testing. So those are the kinds of things that I think need to happen, and obviously I support those initiatives. But that's the kind of stuff I'm hearing most about right now.
And how busy are your staff right now? I'm guessing it is quite, even though your offices aren't open, probably still quite busy right now, right?
Yeah, it continues to be fairly busy. I would say that the number of phone calls and emails have trailed off a little bit. It's not quite as busy as it was certainly in the first several weeks of this pandemic, but it's still fairly busy, and they're all still working full time for sure.
What kind of services are you still offering? I'm sure it's a wide range, but what can people still be calling you about? I know COVID-19 obviously is the hot topic still, but there are other issues that happen within the riding. What can people be talking to you about?
Yeah, absolutely. The offices continue to operate, and of course, we still are getting questions about everything from employment insurance to the benefit programs to CRA questions, and of course, staff aren't always in the office, so oftentimes you have to leave a message, but we will get back to you. We're hearing lots of questions still about the reopening, about support programs, and so we continue to be available, obviously, to answer those questions as much as we possibly can.
Well, Scott, listen, I appreciate you taking the time. I know it's going to be an interesting summer for you, your first time as MP, and you're not really going to have any events to go and tour around or, talk to your constituents, unfortunately. But I know you'll do your best to, to keep in touch with people, and we will keep in touch with you and hear more about what you have to say from the Hill. And thank you very much for taking the time.
Thanks very much, James.
All right. Thank you very much for watching the Riding Report. We'll be back in about 2 weeks to a month with more updates from Scott Aitchison. Thanks again.